Hi, everybody. Thanks for coming today. Thanks for listening to my talk. Let me walk through this. Oh, cool. These are not the emojis I picked. That's awesome. We can figure that out. So, hi, I'm Will Robinson. I've become the director of Alliance Foundation. We're a Web3 accelerator for early stage crypto startups. We try to help founders help each other, basically. And I'm not here to shill Alliance beyond this, but a lot of what I've learned has come from teaching founders how to tell their stories. And so at some points, I will seem like a walking billboard, and I'm going to apologize for that. I'm also going to apologize because the vast majority of this talk is going to be about startups and VCs and the stories they tell each other. And if you are neither of these things, then at best I can be a charismatic and entertaining individual at the front and sort of talk past you. There we go. So before I get into this quote, I want to legitimize myself as a speaker on this topic of storytelling. I spent a decade studying video games and the stories video games told. And I did that with a particular interest into mechanism design. How do games tell stories with math? How do the rules of a game shape the narrative that emerges? And I taught students how to do this for years, how to tell stories with math and how to read the math behind video games as stories. And a good example would be something like Monopoly. So if you've ever played Monopoly, you might have had fun or had some misery, depending on your perspective. But it was originally designed by Lizzie Phillips to help explain to people that if you don't tax land at 100%, everybody's going to go bankrupt except for one person who's going to hold all the wealth in the world. And it was meant to be this big, like, Cassandra moment. The sky is falling, and the Parker brothers were like, that's fun as shit. I'm going to buy that off you for $1,000 and sell 1,000,000 copies for the rest of time. This kind of mechanism in Monopoly is basically around luck and money transfer, and it just evolves this emergent property. And I became fascinated by the dynamics of these kinds of stories in my doctorate. And the year I graduated, I jumped totally out of games into crypto because I had this opportunity to keep teaching mechanism designs, but in a new context of Bitcoin. And I taught Bitcoin to accountants and auditors around the world, helping audit things like the Ethereum Foundation. And then 4 years ago, had a new opportunity to tell stories and teach startup founders how to be like Steve Jobs and sell the world on their ideas. So the importance of storytelling is that essentially the most powerful people have to be storytellers. And it's not a very intuitive thing. You think the most powerful person, that's like the President of the United States. He's not a storyteller. Well, actually, he is. Obviously, he fabricates an entire reality for everybody to sort of get behind and to imagine that they're with him on this journey. And instead of reasoning from first principles, which is what very few people in the world do, we reason by analogy. We say that this is like this other thing you've seen before. And that's a really important evolutionary trait that humans have, that we learn through stories and not through facts and principles and through reasoning, because that's too slow. You couldn't get through a day in your life if you had to relearn from the basic founding ideas of the world, how to brush your teeth. And so the storyteller becomes really important, except when, things break down. So for instance, if it's 2020 and you see that there's some disease in China that's replicating at a rate that's like roughly 2 per 1 person that gets the disease, and that disease kills roughly 1 in 20, well, you should be scared shitless because this thing's going to spread across the entire world and kill everyone. And you could know this months in advance if you could reason from first principles, but you can't, and everybody just tells you it's like SARS and it'll be okay. And similarly with things like Bitcoin, if you could look at these 3 or 4 different computer science ideas, kludge them together and realize, oh, we're going to replace all of finance, that's the emergent property of this system, well, then you would sort of reallocate your funds and reimagine things. But the world I came from, a very leftist, anti-crypto world of the academy, the sense was this is bad for the environment, it's for mostly criminals to use, and gross, smelly libertarians are into it, so definitely don't read up on this Bitcoin thing. And well, I had fun staying poor for a while, and then I stopped, did my own research, as they say, the DYOR, and learned that you can't only work through stories. And I started thinking about anti-memetics, the opposite of stories. This is my favorite novel. It's actually a novella. There is no anti-memetics division. It's about the scientists who study things that are impossible to remember. So what happens if you have this field of research where every day you study something and by the end of the day you've forgotten everything you learned? And the next morning you have to go from your notes and hope you can learn it even faster than you did the day before so that you get a little bit further along in your scientific discoveries. And what happens if you start to realize that there are things that evolve, they're killing us every day, but they're just so forgettable, we never learn to deal with them or think about it. It's a horror story. It's a terrifying book, but I highly recommend it, and I highly recommend the idea of thinking in the terms of anti-memetics. What are things that are impossible to spread from mind to mind? Monopoly is a great example. So Monopoly was a dominant board game even today, barely being replaced by Catan, a vastly better game that's already 30 years out of date and nowhere near as good as the current games that exist in board game land. But here it's so hard to spread the knowledge of one new board game to another person because you have to download a whole bunch of rules. It takes time, and groups that do form around board games have very little interest in spreading beyond their immediate vicinity because they already have a gaming group to play with. Right? So which kinds of ideas are anti-memetic and hard to sell? It becomes very important in crypto as well. Bitcoin is a truly anti-memetic thing, right? It's so hard to get someone else to care about Bitcoin in the early days or Ethereum in the early days, and that's why the people who bought in early did so well, because they were able to get past that. And then we ended up in a moment where now all we can think about in crypto are the memetic tokens, right? Those tokens that are so easily spread, from the fart coins to things as legitimate as Arbitrum, which you mentioned earlier, for instance. And so this talk, which I'm going to try and move as quickly as I can, is about the storytelling, and this is how I see myself as Bobby Fischer playing chess against my cohort. So I'll train 30 startups at a time in how to tell stories, and each one is coming at me with their narratives. I'm like, no, that's boring, or no, that's out of date, or no, that's unclear, or that's grammatically incorrect, or whatever it is. Prepping teams to tell their stories in the shortest possible time. Often they'll come at me with like a 20-minute spiel, and we have to condense it to 90 seconds because it's about how much mental bandwidth VCs tend to have. And we also really focus on our one-liners. Right? Every project has to have this very clear one-liner, and it's a different one-liner for every audience, right? One for your employees, one's for your users, one's for your venture investors. And you have to make that one-liner enticing, because the idea is everybody, including the VCs, are going to need to reason from first principles at a certain point. But before they do, you have to entice them to reason from first principles to begin with, to get them past that initial anti-memetic hump of learning about your startup. And so we go with enticing, and then we go with memorable. You have to be able to remember your one-liner. And lastly, your one-liner has to be accurate, which is the least important of those three things. And that's what really frustrating for most founders is they start with accuracy. No, my one-liner needs to have 47 words so that I can get to exactly what we do. And by the time you finish the last one, they've forgotten the first, and they can't remember or repeat it to their investment committee. And so there's no chance things are going to go forward. So this is me, this is what I do, this is who I was, and this is basically the history of how I see memetics. I don't know what that circle is, this is a weird artifact, I'm sorry for that. But basically, I'll tell you how I see the history of crypto's narratives from when I started working with founders 4 years ago. So it's 2021, and because of COVID, which you mentioned earlier, the governments have printed a lot of new money. And a lot of new money has had to find a place to go. And what it starts to do is buying companies, because private companies, and making companies go public. And this makes venture capitalists look like geniuses, because for the previous few years, they'd been investing, and now their portfolios are skyrocketing. And so people see these venture capitalists with all this money that they're making, and they say, oh, I just got this new free money from the government, I need to invest it somewhere, and you, Mr. VC, look like a goddamn genius. Here's my capital. And the problem is this happens to so many VCs at the exact same time that they start flooding the market with venture capital, and absolutely any idea under the sun in crypto starts getting investment. And not just some investment, prices are bid up to astronomical levels. Companies that are pre-team, pre-idea are raising at 50 million, 100 million valuations. It's sort of an absurd era. And this is a phenomenon that is macro-driven. And as a result, the stories change, right? The stories and visions you need to sell to these people, because they're coming in at 100 million valuation day one, is to sell them trillion-dollar visions day one. And it's sort of unhealthy for a company to be born trying to make $1 trillion. But that's what they tried to do. They sold things like games, but not just games that would solve global poverty, right? That's what games were supposed to do in 2021. Everyone in the South would have a job playing games for wealthy Westerners. Or, some DAOs. We'd reimagine all of working. That's the dancers up there. Everybody would rebuild companies from the ground up to work exactly the way they wanted for the correct incentives they needed, and we would just reimagine the entire corporate infrastructure of the world. And these were the stories that could captivate because of the demands of capital at the time. It's for very like Marxist reading, right, where capital drives culture. And then obviously DeFi and finance, which continues to this day, is an important story. Wow, I really don't know what that symbol's doing there either. Forgive the male symbol, I swear it wasn't there when I put it. In 2022, 2023, we see the collapse of FTX and the collapse of Terra. And so VC changes quite a bit, the narrative shift, where now we need to do a little bit more diligence than just 2 hours. We moved to like 2 days of diligence on companies before writing checks. And we're seeing a lot of things like layer ones and layer twos. That's my layer cake here. Steppen becomes this breakout success for moving to earn. And we have a lot of DePIN too. Now the grandiose ideas are around reimagining hardware and physical infrastructure. And then following year, we're starting to see VCs run out of that money that they raised in 2021. The ability to raise now takes 2 weeks instead of 2 days or 2 hours. And not only that, the returns are starting to look bad. So those investors that had put those checks in at $100 million valuation are unable to show markups in their funds, and so they're being a little bit more reserved. But they see things like count abstraction, SocialFi, Farcaster, FriendTech, and they start getting excited in the space. We have one company that was previously in NFTs. We pivot them to build into this like SocialFi space, but it doesn't go very far. Then we see meme coins show up, and we tell them, look, go dig into the meme coin space, because maybe that's where the VCs are excited. Maybe that's where you'll find users, more importantly. And so they do, and they build this interesting product called Pump.Fun, and it does really well, capturing a lot of mind share. And then the next narrative that shows up is Telegram. We've got all these users there. Let's go after them. And so once again, the narrative becomes much more user-focused as opposed to grandiose vision-focused. The narrative shifts because the VCs need a little bit more concrete, I think, investment possibilities. And then to today, we have 3, I think, dominant trends for investment that people are excited about: stable coins, payment rails, revenue like day one. The VCs are now so far away from their zero interest rate phenomena dollars that they have to be grounded in actual like business financials. Rounds now take 2 months to diligence. It is a much more sober, nature is healing moment. And so if you are raising right now and you're sort of scared that your funds aren't coming in, well, don't worry, it's sort of normal for what's happening now. And LPs have now just like lost all the cash they also had. The limited partners for these VCs are now short on cash, and the VCs have bad track records. So it's really tough for the fundraising space. And the stories we tell are now much, much more concrete, with much better traction, with more users, with more real people building at every step of the way. And yet we still have some things even reject VCs. So VC is so hard to raise. Some people say, well, VCs are immoral. Let's not even bother raising from them. And this is a big part of hyperliquid's narrative. If the VCs want us so bad, they can buy us on the liquid market. And I don't think it's cope, because they're doing very well and they're being successful, but I think there's also something to be said about this relationship between when it gets hard to raise from VCs, you're like, sour grapes. And then AI. AI just is a super dominant trend, right, in this narrative. And in part, it's because these VCs are sitting on this cash and they can't put it into AI because their LPs said, hey, you have to only invest in crypto. You're a crypto expert. What are you doing? You can't touch AI. And the VCs like, but the opportunities, they're so big. And so we see a huge influx of capital into AI meets crypto. Anybody who can do any kind of intersection, no matter how absurd, gets at least a look at. And the vast majority of these projects obviously are vaporware, and it's not their fault. It's just the nature of the game and where the capital is. And some are actually quite reasonable, and we've even been supportive of a few. So this history kind of lined up. It's obviously inaccurate. I mean, there's way more narratives that happened during that time. I don't think it's a complete view, to say the least. And I don't think that you can, say, hey, games will never raise again and that narrative is dead. But if you do try to raise on that premise, you have to be aware that it's an uphill battle, right? That narrative is past, and to bring it back means coming up with a reason for why it would have returned. And I think some things would be quite difficult to bring back, like NFTs, for instance. You need to have a unique perspective as to why. And the reason is because VCs are basically trained on this curve, this sigmoid curve. Their entire existence is looking for something that's going to reach an inflection point, something whose growth is going to grow. And the only way you're going to be able to do that for them is if you have a growing number of users paying a growing amount of money. And so these narratives that people tell, they're not necessarily built from whole cloth. It's not like I'm going to design my company and they will come. It's no, I'm going to see where users are and what users are doing, and then I'm going to build for them and capture their mindshare and attention, and then they'll reiterate my story with me. And that's how the game is played today. And so whenever we work with any company, we'll say, hey, focus on your users, go talk to them every day, find out what they need, build that for them. And that's the only sort of sure path to success. And by sure path, I mean, 1 in 10 chance. But that's the best you kind of get in this venture space. So yeah, here you got seed, Series A, Series B, Series C kind of investment opportunities for VCs, and everybody's just looking for that inflection point and growth. There are lots more things to say. I hope this talk met some of your standards for what you're hoping to hear. It's sort of an interestingly weird space that I find myself in. Thank you for your attention, and I'll be happy to take any questions with the few minutes we have left. Thank you. I see some hands up here, but I don't know how to get. Do you just say things loudly, or is there a microphone? Okay, you say it loudly and I'll repeat it.
Okay, no, I've got a microphone now.
It's coming.
I've got a microphone now. Okay, there we go. Really neat point regarding needing multiple stories. Nobody's ever said that, I think I've ever heard. How many do you think you need?
You sound like you're coming from there. Where are you? Okay, great. Hi.
How many do you think they need, and how differentiated should they be?
Oh, they're extremely different, and they need 2 minimum, but I think 3 ideally, right? So the venture capitalists, their interest is in hearing that there is a problem that is currently being solved badly, and that you are going to solve it better with the best team in the world, and that then they're going to make a boatload of money, right? And that's the sort of narrative you need to tell. But your users don't really care about your future success or your equity growth, right? They care about you have a solution to a problem they currently have. We call it the hair on fire problem. The only kind of problem a startup can solve is a hair on fire problem. And if you haven't heard, it goes like this. You're in a room, your hair is on fire, and there's a startup there, and you say, hey, please, my hair is on fire. Can you help me? And they say, I have a brick. That's all I can build with my startup is this brick. Would you like to bash your head in with this brick? And I say, well, I don't want to burn my hands, so okay, I'll take this brick and I'll bash my head in, and here's a SaaS payment. And so that's the different kind of story that needs to be told. Sure, yeah. I have to cut it, so goodbye. I'll see you outside maybe. Thank you.